Emma Fletcher's flashlight beam froze on the silver-gray hide now carpeted with thousands of pulsating red caterpillars. Her throat closed mid-shout, radio slipping from trembling fingers. What should have been a routine fence check had become a waking nightmare. Daisy, the massive Brahman cow, bellowed a sound so primal it sent birds erupting from distant trees. Behind Emma, Deputy Collins stumbled backward, coffee thermos clattering against rock as he gasped, "Sweet Jesus." 3 days ago, Daisy had been grazing contentedly with her calf. Now her desperate eyes locked with Emma's, the same pleading look Eleanor had given when they'd wheeled her into Cedar Pines nursing home, a mother unable to protect what she loved most. "Get Dr. Carson on the line now," Emma commanded, even as her mind screamed to run. What had transformed this peaceful canyon into a death trap? And what was that strange metal door half hidden in the rock face behind Titan's struggling form? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Sunflower Ranch had been a fixture in Hill Country, Texas for over 70 years. Nestled between rolling limestone hills and sprawling oak savanna, its weathered wooden sign greeted visitors with the promise of Texas-sized hospitality since 1953. Frank Wilson, the third-generation owner, ran the operation with the same no-nonsense efficiency his grandfather had established decades ago. The 300-acre property specialized in Brahman cattle, those distinctive silver-gray giants with their characteristic humps and pendulous ears. They thrived in the punishing Texas heat where other breeds faltered, their sweat glands working overtime during the blistering summer months when temperatures regularly climbed past 100 degrees. Emma Fletcher hadn't planned on becoming a Texas Parks and Wildlife ranger. At 22, she'd been halfway through veterinary school when her mother's pickup truck collided with an 18-wheeler on Highway 281. Eleanor Fletcher survived, but the traumatic brain injury left her diminished, a shadow of the formidable rancher who'd single-handedly run their family property after Emma's father passed. With mounting medical bills and no siblings to share the burden, Emma abandoned her dream of veterinary medicine for the steady paycheck of government work. Now, at 38, Emma's life revolved around two things: her 12-hour ranger shifts, patrolling the Edwards Plateau Conservation Area, and her twice-weekly visits to Cedar Pines nursing home, where Eleanor's care consumed nearly 80% of Emma's salary. The $42,000 in medical debt hung around her neck like a millstone, each monthly minimum payment barely touching the principal. Among Sunflower Ranch's prize breeding stock, none was more impressive than Daisy. Standing nearly 6 feet tall at the shoulder and weighing over 200 pounds, the silver-white Brahman cow had a reputation for intelligence that bordered on eerie. Ranch hands swore she could unlatch gates and recognize vehicles by their engine sounds. Frank often boasted that Daisy had the eyes of an old soul, deep, knowing, and unnervingly perceptive. Her calf, Titan, had been born 3 months earlier, a strapping bull with his mother's coloring and what promised to be impressive musculature as he matured. The bond between mother and calf was immediate and fierce, with Daisy demonstrating protective behaviors that impressed even the most seasoned ranchers. Where she went, Titan followed, his gangly legs working double time to keep pace with his mother's measured strides. Then came the storm. Meteorologists had predicted a rough weather system, but no one anticipated the fury that descended on Hill Country that August evening. Wind gusts exceeding 60 miles per hour bent oak trees like blades of grass. Flash floods transformed dry creek beds into raging torrents within minutes. Livestock scattered in panic as fences collapsed under fallen trees and debris. When dawn broke after the tempest, Frank Wilson took stock of the damage with a grim expression. Buildings were damaged, equipment destroyed, and, most alarmingly, several animals were missing, including young Titan. The morning after the storm, Daisy's mournful bellowing echoed across Sunflower Ranch. Standing at the broken fence line where she'd last seen her calf, the massive Brahman cow released sounds so full of anguish that the ranch hands paused in their cleanup efforts, exchanging uncomfortable glances. Frank Wilson, sweating through his chambray shirt despite the early hour, approached the distraught animal cautiously. "Never heard a cow make a sound like that," he remarked to his foreman, Miguel. "Like she's calling for him." Miguel, who'd worked with cattle for 30 years, nodded solemnly. "Animals know when they lose their young. But this one," he hesitated, crossing himself, "she's different. Always has been." For 3 days, Daisy refused to eat. The ranch hands left fresh hay and water, but she ignored it all, standing sentinel at the damaged fence, occasionally walking the perimeter as if searching for a gap or weak point. Her once robust frame began to show signs of deterioration, her prominent hip bones pressing against her silver-gray hide. "She'll wear herself out soon enough," Frank assured his concerned staff. "Nature takes its course. We've lost calves before." But on the morning of the 4th day, Carlita, the housekeeper, burst into the kitchen where Frank was having his coffee. "Mr. Wilson, Daisy's gone. She broke through the north fence, the new one." Her eyes were wide with disbelief. "Metal posts bent like they were made of plastic. She's headed into the conservation area." Frank's coffee mug froze halfway to his lips. The Edwards Plateau Conservation Area was 16,000 acres of protected wilderness, limestone canyons, dense oak thickets, and flash flood-prone arroyos. A labyrinth where an animal could disappear forever. "Call Parks and Wildlife," he ordered, already reaching for his boots. "Tell them we've got a situation." Emma Fletcher was 40 minutes into her shift when the call came through. A massive Brahman cow had breached the conservation area's boundaries, an invasive presence in a delicate ecosystem that was supposed to remain free from domestic livestock. Protocol was clear: locate the animal, tranquilize if necessary, and remove it immediately. She parked her Parks and Wildlife truck at the northernmost ranger station and prepared her gear methodically: tranquilizer gun, radio, GPS unit, first aid kit. As she loaded supplies into her backpack, Deputy Collins pulled up in his county cruiser. "Thought you might want backup," he offered, stepping out of his vehicle. "Dispatch mentioned it's a big one. Brahman from Wilson's place." Emma nodded gratefully. Collins was nearing retirement, but his knowledge of the local terrain was unmatched. "Heard the storm hit them hard. Probably spooked and looking for shelter." They picked up the trail quickly. Unlike deer or feral hogs that moved with stealth through the wilderness, a 1,200-pound Brahman left unmistakable signs: broken branches, disturbed earth, and occasional tufts of silver hair caught on thorny underbrush. "She's moving with purpose," Collins observed after an hour of tracking. "Not wandering, heading straight southeast." Emma frowned. Animals typically followed paths of least resistance: downhill, along creek beds, through natural clearings. This cow was forging forward regardless of terrain, pushing through dense thickets that left bloody scratches on her hide, visible in the traces she left behind. As they followed Daisy's trail deeper into the conservation area, Emma's thoughts drifted to her morning visit with Eleanor. Her mother had been having one of her increasingly rare lucid days. "You look tired, Emmy," Eleanor had observed, patting her daughter's hand with paper-thin fingers. "Still working too hard?" "I'm fine, Mom." "How's the new medication?" Eleanor had waved away the question. "Tell me about the animals. You see any interesting ones lately?" It was always animals with Eleanor. Even as other memories faded, her connection to the creatures she'd raised remained intact. Sometimes Emma brought photos from her ranger work: deer with fawns, a bobcat spotted at dawn, wild turkeys strutting across a meadow. Eleanor would study them with more focus than she could muster for most human interactions. "Animals remember," Eleanor had told her once during a moment of clarity. They remember kindness and cruelty both, longer than people do sometimes. The radio at Emma's hip crackled, pulling her back to the present. It was her supervisor, Richard Keating. "Fletcher, what's your status on that loose cattle situation?" "Still tracking, sir. About 4 miles in, heading southeast." "Remember the protocol?" Keating's voice was clipped, professional. "No domestic livestock in the conservation area. Trank and transport out ASAP." "Copy that," Emma responded, though something about the cow's determined path nagged at her. This wasn't random wandering. The animal was searching for something. By mid-afternoon, they reached a limestone ridge overlooking a narrow canyon. The August sun beat down mercilessly, and both rangers paused to drink from their water bottles. Collins wiped sweat from his weathered brow. "Should be able to spot her from up here if she's down in the canyon," he suggested, pulling out binoculars. Emma scanned the rugged landscape below. The canyon floor was dotted with scrub oak and juniper, a seasonal creek bed now dry cutting through its center. At first she saw nothing unusual, then a flash of silver-white against the dull greens and browns. "There," she pointed, "by that large oak." Through the binoculars they could see Daisy clearly. The cow stood motionless, head raised, testing the air with flared nostrils. Then, as if sensing their presence on the ridge, she looked directly up at them. Even from a distance, the intensity of her gaze was unsettling. "She knows we're here," Collins muttered. Before Emma could respond, Daisy did something extraordinary. She bellowed loudly, then deliberately walked several paces toward the canyon's eastern wall, stopped, turned to look back at the rangers, then repeated the process. 3 times she performed this sequence as if, "She wants us to follow her," Emma whispered, hardly believing her own words. Collins snorted. "It's a cow, Fletcher, not Lassie." But Emma was already making her way down the ridge's steep path, a lifetime of her mother's stories about animal intelligence echoing in her mind. Eleanor would have followed that cow without hesitation. Protocol dictated that Emma should tranquilize the animal and arrange for transport back to the ranch. Her job, her ability to pay for her mother's care, depended on following such protocols. Yet something deeper than professional obligation pulled her forward. The same instinct that had made her an excellent ranger, the ability to sense when something wasn't right in her wilderness domain. "This is against regulation," Collins called after her, but he followed nonetheless, hand resting cautiously on his tranquilizer gun. When they reached the canyon floor, Daisy watched their approach with wary eyes. Up close, her condition was alarming. Ribs visible through her hide, scratches from her determined journey weeping small trails of blood, eyes sunken from dehydration. Yet there was no hint of aggression in her posture, only an urgent, almost human insistence. Once again, she walked several paces toward the eastern wall, stopped, and looked back at them. "What's she doing?" Collins murmured. "Leading us somewhere," Emma replied, the certainty in her voice surprising even herself. "And I'm going to follow her." Collins hesitated, then shook his head. "Keating will have my badge if I let you go off protocol like this." "Call it in, then," Emma challenged, already moving in Daisy's direction. "Tell him I'm pursuing unusual animal behavior for assessment." It wasn't entirely a lie. In her 16 years as a ranger, Emma had never witnessed behavior like this from a domestic animal. Whatever was happening transcended standard protocols. Daisy led them along the canyon floor for nearly half a mile, periodically stopping to ensure they were still following. The route grew increasingly difficult, requiring them to scramble over fallen boulders and push through thorny underbrush. Yet the cow navigated the terrain with surprising agility for her size, choosing the most passable routes as if she'd traveled this path before. As they rounded a sharp bend in the canyon, Daisy suddenly quickened her pace, her bellowing taking on a new urgency. She disappeared around another curve, and when Emma and Collins finally caught up, they found her standing before a narrow fissure in the canyon wall, pawing at the ground and releasing low, mournful sounds. What's she found? Collins wondered, approaching cautiously. Emma played her flashlight into the crevice, revealing a space just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Cool air flowed outward, suggesting a larger chamber beyond. There's a cave system here, she realized. Not on any of our maps. Daisy's agitation increased, her massive head butting insistently against Emma's shoulder, nearly knocking her off balance. "Whoa, girl," Emma soothed, placing a steadying hand on the cow's bony flank. "What's in there that's got you so worked up?" As if in answer, a faint, weak mooing sound emanated from within the fissure. Collins and Emma exchanged shocked glances. "Is that—" Collins began. "Her calf," Emma finished, already squeezing through the narrow opening, flashlight clenched between her teeth. "He must have been washed here during the flood." The passage widened after a few feet, opening into a small chamber with a sandy floor. Emma's flashlight beam swept the space, then froze on a sight that would haunt her nightmares for years to come. Titan lay on his side, his silver-gray hide barely visible beneath a writhing carpet of caterpillars, thousands of them, their bodies a distinctive red with yellow markings. Emma recognized them instantly from her ranger training, and a cold dread washed over her. Lonomia obliqua, the deadly assassin caterpillar of South America, whose touch could deliver venom potent enough to cause hemorrhaging, renal failure, and death. A species that had no business being in a Texas canyon. Behind her, Collins squeezed through the opening, his flashlight joining hers to illuminate the horrific scene. "Mother of God," he whispered. "What are those things?" Emma was already reaching for her radio, her fingers trembling as she keyed the emergency channel. "This is Ranger Fletcher requesting immediate backup and emergency veterinary assistance at my GPS coordinates. We have a critical situation involving a potentially lethal invasive species and an injured animal." As she detailed their discovery, Daisy pushed her massive bulk partway through the fissure, her desperate bellows echoing in the confined space. The sound held something beyond animal distress, a mother's anguish that transcended species barriers. Emma made a decision that could end her career. Protocol for invasive species was clear: document, contain, eradicate. The calf was supposed to be removed from the conservation area regardless. The confluence of circumstances should have led to one outcome: euthanasia for the suffering animal and elimination of the invasive threat. Instead, she unshouldered her pack and removed a collapsible shovel. "What are you doing?" Collins asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "I'm going to save this calf," Emma answered, voice steady despite the career suicide she was committing. "And then I'm going to find out how a South American caterpillar colony ended up in a Texas canyon." The caterpillars pulsed across Titan's body like a living crimson blanket. Each creature was about 2 inches long, covered in fine red hairs with distinctive yellow markings, beautiful in their way and utterly lethal. Emma knew from her training that a single Lonomia obliqua contained enough toxin to cause hemorrhaging, renal failure, and ultimately death if not treated promptly. "We need to get them off him," Emma instructed Collins, pulling on her heavy-duty ranger gloves. "But don't touch them with bare skin. Their spines inject venom on contact." Collins backed toward the entrance. "Fletcher, this isn't just against protocol. It's dangerous as hell. These things shouldn't even be in North America." "Exactly," Emma replied, her voice hardening. "Which is why this goes beyond a lost calf. Something very wrong is happening in my conservation area." She reached into her pack again and removed a high-powered flashlight. "Their eyes are sensitive to bright light. If we can get them to retreat..." Aiming the intense beam directly at the mass of caterpillars, Emma was rewarded with immediate movement as the creatures began crawling away from the light, seeking darkness. She moved methodically across Titan's body, forcing the caterpillars to abandon their host. "Collins, call Dr. Carson. Tell her we need antivenom for Lonomia obliqua, and tell her to hurry." The deputy hesitated. "That's a South American species. Where's she going to get anti-venom in hill country?" Olivia Carson worked for Interbio Pharmaceuticals for 15 years before opening her veterinary practice. If anyone has connections to get what we need, it's her. Emma didn't look up from her task, continuing to direct the beam across Titan's trembling form. "And tell her to bring epinephrine, broad-spectrum antibiotics, and IV fluids." As Collins retreated to make the call, Emma spoke softly to Daisy, who remained wedged in the entrance, her massive head straining to see her calf. "We're going to help him, girl. I promise." Titan's condition was critical. The young bull's breathing came in shallow gasps, his normally bright eyes glazed with pain. Welts covered his exposed skin where the caterpillars had made contact, and several areas showed signs of hemorrhaging beneath the hide. Without intervention, he wouldn't survive the next few hours. Emma's radio crackled to life with Richard Keating's voice. "Fletcher, what's your situation? Collins reported a Code 5C? Code 5C, dangerous invasive species with potential public health threat. It was the highest alert level in their response protocols." "Affirmative, sir. We've located a large colony of Lonomia obliqua caterpillars in an unmapped cave system. They've attacked a calf that was separated from Sunflower Ranch during the storm." A long pause followed. When Keating spoke again, his voice had taken on an edge Emma couldn't quite identify. "Lonomia obliqua? You're certain of the identification?" "Positive, sir. Red bodies, yellow markings, distinctive spine formations, exactly matching the reference materials from our invasive species training." Another pause. "Secure the area. Do not, I repeat, do not attempt to remove either the caterpillars or the calf. Wait for the hazmat team. That's a direct order, Fletcher." Something in his tone set off alarm bells in Emma's mind. The protocol was containment and documentation, yes, but the urgency in Keating's voice suggested more than standard procedure. "Sir, the calf is in critical condition. If we don't—" "That's an order, Ranger. Stand down and wait for the response team." The connection went dead, leaving Emma staring at her radio. In 16 years, she'd never disobeyed a direct order from a superior. Her job, and by extension her ability to pay for her mother's care, depended on her reputation as a by-the-book ranger. Yet as she looked at the suffering calf and the distressed mother, something her own mother had told her years ago resurfaced in her memory. "Sometimes, Emmy," Eleanor had said, watching a fox caring for her injured kit, "doing right by God's creatures means breaking man's rules." Collins reappeared at the cave entrance, squeezing past Daisy with difficulty. "Dr. Carson's on her way. ETA 30 minutes. He noticed Emma's expression. "What did Keating say?" To wait for hazmat and not touch anything. She returned to using her flashlight to drive more caterpillars from Titan's body. "I'm not going to let this calf die while waiting for bureaucracy to catch up." Collins shifted uncomfortably. "Fletcher, you could lose your job." "I know." She didn't look up from her work. "But I've got questions that need answers more than I need to follow protocol right now, like how a South American caterpillar colony established itself in a Texas cave, and why Keating sounded nervous rather than surprised." As she worked, Emma became aware of something else troubling. The caterpillars were behaving unusually. In nature, Lonomia obliqua gathered in groups on tree trunks, not on living animals. Their venom was defensive, not predatory. This attack pattern was aberrant. "Something's not right here," she murmured, directing her flashlight toward the deeper recesses of the cave. The beam revealed hundreds more caterpillars clustered on the walls, but also something unexpected. A small metal box attached to the cave wall, with what appeared to be a camera lens. "Collins, look at this!" The deputy joined her, squinting at the discovery. "Is that surveillance equipment?" Before Emma could respond, a new voice called from outside the cave. "Parks and Wildlife." "It's Dr. Carson!" Olivia Carson squeezed through the entrance, a large medical case clutched in her hands. At 42, she moved with the efficient precision of someone accustomed to emergency situations. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her eyes quickly assessed the scene with clinical detachment. "Lonomia obliqua," she confirmed, kneeling beside Titan without hesitation. "I haven't seen these since my research days in Brazil." She opened her case, revealing an array of medical supplies, including several vials labeled with biohazard symbols. "I've got anti-venom, but we need to work fast. The hemorrhagic factors in their venom will cause irreversible damage if we don't counteract them soon." "You just happen to have South American caterpillar antivenom?" Collins asked skeptically. Dr. Carson's hands didn't pause in their preparations. "I maintain connections with international wildlife veterinarians. When I got your call, I contacted the emergency response unit at San Antonio Zoo. They had 2 vials in their exotic species response kit." She glanced up briefly. "I didn't ask questions, and I suggest you don't either." Something in her tone suggested there was more to the story, but Emma was too focused on saving Titan to press the issue. Together, they worked to clear the remaining caterpillars, administer the antivenom, and start IV fluids to combat the dehydration and shock. Throughout the process, Daisy remained at the entrance, her enormous eyes fixed on her calf, occasionally releasing low, rumbling sounds that seemed to calm the young bull. The maternal concern was palpable, transcending species barriers in a way that touched something deep in Emma's core. As Dr. Carson monitored Titan's vital signs, Emma took the opportunity to investigate the strange camera she'd spotted. Approaching it cautiously, she could see it was a sophisticated piece of equipment, weatherproofed, battery-powered, and positioned to monitor the entire cave. A small red light indicated it was actively recording. "Someone's been watching this place," she said quietly to Collins, who had joined her. "Researchers? Maybe the university has a study going on?" Emma shook her head. "No research permits have been issued for this section of the conservation area, and they certainly wouldn't be studying Lonomia obliqua. It's not native." She examined the rock wall around the camera more carefully and noticed something else: faint tool marks in the limestone, as if the cave had been artificially expanded. Natural caves formed through water erosion had smooth, flowing contours. These marks suggested deliberate human modification. Her exploration was interrupted by Dr. Carson's voice. "He's stabilizing, but we need to move him. This environment isn't helping his condition, and I'm concerned about further envenomation." The challenge was obvious: how to move a several hundred-pound calf through a narrow cave entrance. Even sedated, Titan was too large for them to carry easily. "We need to widen the entrance," Emma decided, returning to her pack for the collapsible shovel. "The limestone here is soft enough that we might be able to break away some of the edge." As she began working on the entrance, her radio crackled again. "Ranger Fletcher, this is Keating. What's your status?" Emma paused, weighing her options. The truth would reveal her insubordination, but a lie would only delay the inevitable confrontation. "Sir, we've begun emergency treatment of the calf with Dr. Carson's assistance. The invasive species has been partially contained, but we've discovered evidence of human activity that suggests this isn't a natural occurrence." Silence followed, then, "I'm 10 minutes out with the response team. Do not touch anything else. Do not remove anything from the site. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir." Emma replied, returning to her work on the entrance with renewed urgency. Something about Keating's response felt wrong, too controlled, too unsurprised. With Collins and Dr. Carson's help, they managed to widen the entrance enough to carefully maneuver Titan through. The young bull was sedated but conscious, his breathing steadier thanks to the emergency treatment. Outside, Daisy greeted her calf with gentle nudges and soft, lowing sounds that seemed to express both relief and concern. As they prepared a makeshift stretcher from ranger equipment to transport Titan back to the trailhead, Emma made a decision. She slipped back into the cave alone, quickly photographed the camera installation and tool marks with her phone, and took samples of the caterpillars in a specimen container from her pack. When she emerged, Collins gave her a knowing look, but said nothing. "Doctor." Carson was focused on Titan, administering another dose of medication. "We should go," Emma urged. "I want to be well on our way before Keating arrives." "What aren't you telling me?" Collins asked quietly as they began the difficult process of transporting Titan along the canyon floor. Emma hesitated, then replied in an equally low voice. "I'm not sure yet, but something about this situation feels wrong. Invasive species don't just appear in remote caves. Someone brought them here, and someone was monitoring them." As they rounded a bend in the canyon, Emma spotted movement on the ridge above, a figure watching them through binoculars, too distant to identify. When the person realized they'd been spotted, they quickly retreated from view. A chill ran down Emma's spine. Whatever they'd stumbled upon was bigger than a lost calf or even an invasive species, and she had a growing suspicion that Richard Keating knew more than he was letting on. The journey back was arduous. Titan, even on the improvised stretcher, was a challenging load to maneuver through the rugged terrain. Daisy walked alongside, occasionally nudging her calf with surprising gentleness from such a massive animal. The maternal concern was so evident that even Collins, a self-proclaimed pragmatist about animal behavior, seemed moved. "Never seen anything like it," he admitted as they paused to adjust their grip. "The way she led us straight to him, almost like she knew we could help." Dr. Carson nodded thoughtfully. "Animal cognition is still poorly understood, especially in species we've domesticated for practical purposes rather than companionship. We tend to underestimate their intelligence because it doesn't mirror our own." The veterinarian had remained tight-lipped about her past, but her expertise was evident in every precise movement and clinical assessment. She monitored Titan constantly, adjusting his medication with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with complex toxicology. "You said you encountered these caterpillars in Brazil?" Emma probed gently. Dr. Carson's expression remained neutral. "During my pharmaceutical research days, Interbio was investigating potential medical applications for various venoms and toxins." She paused, then added with a hint of bitterness, "They were particularly interested in the hemorrhagic properties of Lonomia venom, potential weaponization, though of course that wasn't in the public research papers." The revelation hung in the air between them, adding another troubling dimension to an already mysterious situation. They were still a mile from the trailhead when Emma's radio announced Keating's arrival. His voice was tight, controlled. "Fletcher, what's your location?" "The response team is at the site coordinates you provided." Emma exchanged glances with her companions before responding. "Sir, we're en route to the northern trailhead with the injured calf. Dr. Carson determined it was necessary to remove him from the contaminated environment for proper treatment." The silence that followed was more telling than any verbal response. When Keating finally spoke, his voice had dropped to a dangerous calm. "You directly disobeyed my order, Ranger. Report to my office immediately upon your return." "After I ensure the calf receives proper care, sir." Emma switched off her radio before he could respond, a small act of defiance that felt surprisingly liberating. "He's going to fire you," Collins warned. "Probably," Emma agreed, adjusting her grip on the stretcher. But something isn't right here, and I need to find out what before that happens. As they continued toward the trailhead, Emma found herself thinking of Eleanor again. Her mother's unwavering certainty that animals possessed deeper understanding than humans credited them with. The way Daisy had sought out human help, led them directly to her calf, seemed to validate Eleanor's lifetime of observations. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a connection was forming. Between Eleanor's fragmented memories, the strange appearance of South American caterpillars in a Texas cave, and Richard Keating's suspiciously measured response to what should have been a shocking discovery. By the time they reached the northern trailhead, the August sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the parking area. 2 parks and wildlife trucks and an unmarked black SUV were already waiting. Emma recognized the department vehicles, but the SUV with its tinted windows raised immediate questions. Frank Wilson from Sunflower Ranch paced nervously beside his pickup truck, rushing forward when he spotted them emerging from the trail. "You found him!" The rancher's weathered face showed equal parts relief and astonishment as he approached Daisy, who stood protectively near her calf. "When they told me you were bringing Titan back, I could hardly believe it. How in God's name did you find him so far out?" Emma gestured toward Daisy. "His mother led us straight to him, broke through your fence and tracked him to a cave system in the southeast canyon." Frank stared at the massive Brahman cow with newfound respect. "I've raised cattle my whole life, but I've never seen anything like that." He knelt beside the stretcher where Titan lay, examining the welts and punctures covering the young bull. "What happened to him?" "Lonomia obliqua," Dr. Carson answered, continuing her monitoring of Titan's vital signs. "Assassin caterpillars, highly venomous, native to South America, not Texas." Frank's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "How?" "That's what I'd like to know," Emma interjected, scanning the parking area. She noticed 2 men in hazmat suits preparing equipment near one of the department trucks. "Where's Keating?" As if summoned by her question, Richard Keating emerged from the second Parks and Wildlife vehicle. At 55, the supervisor carried himself with military rigidity, his uniform immaculate despite the summer heat. His closely cropped gray hair and perpetual frown gave him a stern appearance that had intimidated newer rangers for years. "Fletcher," he acknowledged coldly, "I see you've disregarded direct orders yet again." Emma met his gaze steadily. The calf needed immediate medical attention. Dr. Carson determined removal was necessary for survival. "That wasn't your call to make." Keating's attention shifted to the men in hazmat suits. "Teams ready to secure the site. I'll need exact coordinates of the cave entrance." "Before that happens," Emma countered, "I'd like to know how a colony of South American caterpillars established itself in my conservation area, and why there's surveillance equipment monitoring them." A flicker of something, surprise, concern, crossed Keating's face before his expression hardened again. "That's not your concern, Ranger. Your job was to report and contain, not investigate or remove evidence." "Evidence?" Emma seized on the word. "Evidence of what exactly?" The tense exchange was interrupted by the arrival of a large animal transport vehicle. The driver, a young man in veterinary scrubs, approached Dr. Carson with a clipboard. "Got your request for emergency transport to the clinic," he said, having her sign several forms. "We're set up with the equipment you specified." As they prepared to transfer Titan to the transport vehicle, Emma noticed a tall man in a crisp suit emerge from the unmarked SUV. He conferred briefly with Keating, both men speaking in low tones with frequent glances in her direction. "Who's the suit?" Collins murmured beside her. "No idea," Emma replied, "but I don't like how this is shaping up." Dr. Carson approached them, wiping her hands on a surgical towel. "We're ready to move Titan to my clinic. I've administered another dose of antivenom, but he'll need continued monitoring. The next 24 hours will be critical. I'm coming with you, Frank declared, patting Daisy's flank. This girl, too. She won't be separated from her calf again. Keating stepped forward. Actually, Mr. Wilson will need to decontaminate both animals before release. Standard protocol for exposure to invasive species. They'll come to my clinic, Dr. Carson stated firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. I have isolation facilities and can monitor for additional symptoms. The antivenom I'm using is experimental. I need to track his response carefully. A silent standoff ensued, with Keating clearly weighing his options. Finally, he nodded curtly. Fine, but I'll need full documentation and reports. And Fletcher, he added, turning to Emma, your presence is required here. We need a complete debrief on the site location. Emma hesitated, torn between following the animals to ensure their safety and remaining to investigate the increasingly suspicious circumstances. She caught Dr. Carson's eye, and the veterinarian gave her an almost imperceptible nod. I'll take care of them, she promised quietly. You do what you need to do here. As the transport team carefully loaded Titan into the vehicle, Daisy became agitated, releasing a series of distressed bellows. Frank spoke soothingly to the massive cow, eventually coaxing her into a separate compartment of the transport with surprising ease. She knows we're helping him, he remarked, watching the doors close on both animals. Smartest damn cow I've ever seen. The transport pulled away, leaving Emma facing Keating and the mysterious suit-clad man, who now approached with an extended hand. Ranger Fletcher. I'm Agent Howard Mercer, Fish and Wildlife Service, Special Investigations Unit. His handshake was firm, his expression unreadable. I understand you've made quite the discovery today. Emma studied him carefully. The Fish and Wildlife Service did indeed have a special investigations unit that handled wildlife trafficking and environmental crimes, but Mercer's demeanor struck her as odd, too polished, too controlled for a field agent. Lonomia obliqua isn't on any approved research list for Texas, she stated. Their presence constitutes a severe biosecurity breach, and the surveillance equipment in that cave suggests this wasn't accidental. Mercer's expression remained neutral. That's precisely why we're here, Ranger. This situation falls under federal jurisdiction. We'll need you to show us exactly where you found the specimens. Emma glanced at Collins, who gave a slight shrug. They had little choice but to comply with a federal request, yet everything about the situation felt wrong. I'll take you to the site, she agreed reluctantly, but I have questions that need answers. All in due time, Mercer assured her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. As they prepared to return to the canyon, Emma's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Don't trust Mercer Carson. She deleted it immediately, keeping her expression neutral despite her racing thoughts. The hike back to the cave took nearly 2 hours, with Emma deliberately setting a measured pace to give herself time to think. Keating and Mercer followed, occasionally conferring in hushed tones that ceased whenever she glanced back at them. The hazmat team brought up the rear, their bulky protective gear making the journey arduous in the late afternoon heat. Collins had been instructed to remain at the trailhead, a directive that struck Emma as unnecessary and concerning. Her partner's absence left her feeling vulnerable, especially as her suspicions about Keating and Mercer grew with each passing minute. This area isn't on any of our patrol maps, she commented as they navigated a particularly steep section of the canyon. Almost as if someone wanted to ensure it remained unvisited. Parks and Wildlife can't map every inch of 16,000 acres, Keating replied dismissively. There are dozens of unmapped caves and crevices throughout the system. Yet someone found this one, Emma persisted, and installed surveillance equipment. We'll address all that once we've secured the site, Mercer interjected smoothly. Our priority is containing the invasive species before it can spread. When they finally reached the cave entrance, Emma noticed immediately that something had changed. The opening appeared wider than when they'd left, the limestone edges freshly broken, creating a passage large enough for an adult to walk through upright. "Someone's been here," she said sharply, reaching instinctively for her sidearm. Mercer stepped forward, blocking her path. "We had an advance team secure the area. Standard procedure." "Without waiting for the site coordinates?" Emma challenged. "How did they know where to go?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, as Keating pushed past her into the cave. The hazmat team followed, unloading equipment just inside the entrance. Emma entered last, her senses on high alert. The interior had indeed been altered. The caterpillars were still present, clustering on the walls, but many had been collected into sealed containers. The surveillance camera she'd noticed earlier was gone, leaving only mounting hardware attached to the rock wall. "Your advance team removed evidence from an active investigation site," Emma stated, anger rising in her voice. "That's a breach of protocol and possibly illegal tampering." Mercer regarded her with cool assessment. "Ranger Fletcher, I understand your concern, but this operation falls outside standard parks and wildlife jurisdiction. The Special Investigations Unit has broader authority when dealing with potential bioterrorism threats." "Bioterrorism?" Emma repeated incredulously. "Or is this about covering up something else entirely?" Keating turned sharply. "That's enough, Fletcher. You're already facing disciplinary action for insubordination. Don't make it worse." As the hazmat team worked methodically to collect remaining caterpillar specimens, Emma circulated around the cave, noting other changes. The tool mark she'd observed earlier had been partially obscured by what appeared to be fresh scraping. Someone had attempted to remove evidence of the cave's artificial modification. Her exploration led her deeper into the cave than she'd ventured during the rescue. The main chamber branched into a narrower tunnel that curved away from the entrance. Following it cautiously, her flashlight revealed boot prints in the sandy floor, fresh ones different from her own or Collins's. The tunnel extended about 30 feet before opening into a second, smaller chamber. Here, Emma's flashlight beam revealed something that stopped her cold. Metal shelving bolted to the rock walls, now empty but clearly designed for storage. On the floor lay discarded packaging material with Portuguese labeling. She quickly photographed everything with her phone, aware that Keating or Mercer might appear at any moment. As she documented the scene, her light caught something partially buried in the sandy floor, a small leather wallet. Retrieving it carefully, she found it contained identification for Frank Wilson, the owner of Sunflower Ranch. Emma's mind raced. Frank had claimed he hadn't been in the conservation area since the storm. Why would his wallet be hidden in a secret cave chamber with evidence of exotic species trafficking? Before she could investigate further, footsteps approached from the main tunnel. "Ranger Fletcher?" Mercer's voice echoed off the stone walls. "This area hasn't been cleared for exploration." Emma quickly pocketed the wallet and turned to face him. "Just being thorough. Isn't that what you want? A complete investigation?" Mercer's expression was unreadable in the dim light. "I think we've seen enough here. The hazmat team will handle the remainder of the containment operation." As they returned to the main chamber, Emma noted that most of the evidence was already packaged and being removed. The efficiency of the operation suggested preparation beyond a routine response. "Where are the specimens being transported?" she asked as they exited the cave. "A secure federal facility," Mercer replied vaguely. "Standard procedure for Class A invasive biohazards." Outside, the light was fading, casting the canyon in deepening shadow. The temperature had dropped slightly, bringing minimal relief from the August heat. As the hazmat team loaded their containers into specialized transport cases, Keating approached Emma. "You're on administrative leave pending review," he informed her, voice clipped and professional. "Turn in your badge and sidearm when we return to headquarters." "On what grounds?" "Insubordination?" interference with federal operations, unauthorized removal of evidence from an investigation site. He listed the infractions without emotion. You transported a contaminated animal without proper protocols and potentially exposed civilian populations to an invasive species. I saved that calf's life, Emma countered, anger flaring, and potentially prevented an ecological disaster by identifying the Lonomia colony before it could spread. That's for the review board to determine, Keating replied coldly. Until then, you're relieved of duty. As they began the hike back to the trailhead, Emma's thoughts turned to Eleanor. Her mother's care at Cedar Pines consumed nearly all of Emma's salary. Without her job, the carefully balanced financial arrangement would collapse within weeks. Yet something far more troubling than personal finances was unfolding. The presence of South American caterpillars, surveillance equipment, and storage facilities in a hidden cave system pointed to organized illegal activity, possibly exotic species trafficking. And both Keating and the supposed federal agent seemed more interested in removing evidence than investigating origins. Halfway back to the trailhead, Emma's phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Eleanor's memory. Ask about Operation Silk Road, 1987. The cryptic message sent a chill through her. Operation Silk Road? And how did it connect to her mother? As they approached the vehicles, Emma noticed Collins waiting beside his county cruiser, his expression tense. When Keating and Mercer moved ahead to confer with the hazmat transport team, Collins pulled her aside. "Something's not right," he murmured. "While you were gone, I ran Mercer's credentials through our system. There's no Howard Mercer in the Fish and Wildlife Special Investigations Unit." Emma's suspicion crystallized into certainty. They're removing evidence, not securing it, and they've been monitoring that cave for some time. "What's your play here?" Collins asked, concern evident in his voice. Emma considered her options. Direct confrontation would likely end with immediate arrest on fabricated charges. She needed time to understand what she'd stumbled upon. "I need to check on Titan and Daisy at Carson's clinic," she decided, "and I need to talk to my mother. Something tells me Eleanor knows more about this situation than anyone realizes." Collins nodded, sliding his car keys into her hand discreetly. "Take my cruiser. I'll tell them you had a family emergency with your mother. It'll buy you some time before they realize you've gone off-grid." "You could lose your job," Emma warned. The deputy, 3 months from retirement, offered a wry smile. "Some things matter more than pensions, Fletcher. Go find out what's really happening here." As Keating and Mercer continued their discussion with the hazmat team, Emma slipped quietly to Collins's cruiser. The vehicle started with a quiet rumble, and she pulled away from the trailhead without headlights, not activating them until she'd rounded the first bend in the access road. In her rearview mirror, the gathering darkness concealed whatever reaction her departure might have provoked. Ahead lay Dr. Carson's clinic, where a wounded calf and his devoted mother waited, and perhaps answers to questions that grew more disturbing by the hour. Eleanor's fragmented memories, a hidden cave of deadly caterpillars, surveillance equipment, and imposter federal agents, pieces of a puzzle that somehow connected to a ranch cow's extraordinary journey to save her calf. As Emma drove through the gathering Texas night, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd stumbled upon something far more dangerous than an invasive species. And somewhere in her mother's fading memories might lie the key to understanding it all. Dr. Olivia Carson's veterinary clinic sat at the end of a long gravel driveway 3 miles outside the town limits. Unlike most rural vet practices housed in converted barns or simple concrete structures, Carson's facility resembled a small research center, a low-slung building of steel and glass with security cameras monitoring the perimeter and heavy metal doors that required keycard access. Emma parked Collins's cruiser behind a stand of mesquite trees, approaching the clinic on foot. The night had settled fully across the Texas landscape, bringing with it the persistent chorus of cicadas and the occasional distant yip of coyotes. As she neared the building, she noticed the lights were dimmed, with activity visible only in what appeared to be a rear treatment room. Instead of approaching the main entrance, Emma circled to a side door where she'd once helped deliver a sedated mountain lion that had been struck by a vehicle on Highway 281. She sent a text to the number Dr. Carson had used earlier. "At your side door, need to see Titan." Within moments, the door opened to reveal the veterinarian, still dressed in surgical scrubs now stained with what appeared to be blood. Her expression was grim as she quickly ushered Emma inside. "You shouldn't be here," Dr. Carson stated flatly, securing the door behind them. "They'll be looking for you by now." "What's going on, Carson? Who's they? And how do you know about Operation Silk Road?" The veterinarian led Emma through a sterile corridor into a large treatment area where Titan lay on an elevated examination table. The young bull was connected to IV lines and monitoring equipment, his breathing shallow but steady. His silver-gray hide was marred by hundreds of angry welts, some weeping clear fluid that Dr. Carson was methodically cleaning and treating. "His condition is critical but stabilizing," she reported professionally. "The antivenom is counteracting the hemorrhagic factors, but there's significant tissue damage at the contact sites." Emma approached the table, placing a gentle hand on Titan's flank. "Where's Daisy?" "Isolation stall. She wouldn't settle unless she could see him, so I rigged a window between spaces." Dr. Carson gestured toward a large plexiglass panel where the massive Brahman cow stood watching, her dark eyes fixed on her calf with unmistakable concern. "Now," Emma pressed, "about those answers." Dr. Carson sighed deeply, checking Titan's IV before turning to face Emma fully. "What I'm about to tell you could get us both killed. Are you sure you want to know? Someone is breeding deadly South American caterpillars in my conservation area. My supervisor's covering it up. A fake federal agent is removing evidence, and somehow my mother is connected to all this. I think we're well past the point of turning back." The veterinarian nodded grimly, gesturing for Emma to follow her into a small office adjacent to the treatment room. She closed the door and activated a white noise generator before speaking. "I wasn't entirely truthful about my background," she began, sinking into a chair behind a cluttered desk. "I did work for Interbio Pharmaceuticals, but not in traditional research. I was part of a classified program studying biological compounds for potential defensive applications." "Bioweapons," Emma translated flatly. "Dual-use research," Dr. Carson corrected, though without much conviction. "The public side developed antivenoms and treatments. The classified side explored other applications." She pulled a laptop from her desk drawer and entered a complex password. 8 years ago, I discovered my research was being diverted to military applications without proper oversight. When I threatened to blow the whistle, things got ugly." She turned the screen toward Emma, displaying personnel files. "These were my colleagues who opposed the program's direction. 3 died in accidents. 1 disappeared entirely." Emma scanned the documents, a chill settling in her stomach. "What does this have to do with Lonomia obliqua in my conservation area?" Interbio wasn't just a pharmaceutical company. It was a front for a private military contractor called Helix Security Solutions. Dr. Carson navigated to another file. "After I left, I kept tabs on their operations through contacts who shared my concerns. 3 years ago, Helix began a new program codenamed Silk Road, establishing breeding facilities for various toxic species in remote locations across the United States. For what purpose? Officially, to develop antivenoms and study environmental adaptation. Unofficially, to create deniable bioweapons that could be deployed with minimal traceability. Doctor." The Carson's expression hardened. A poisonous species not native to an area leaves few investigative threads. The perfect assassination tool or regional disruptor. Emma struggled to process the implications. And Keating is involved? Richard Keating was Helix's liaison with parks and wildlife departments in 3 states. His position allowed him to secure remote locations within conservation areas, places rarely visited, perfect for covert operations. And the fake federal agent, Mercer? Howard Mercer is Helix Security's field operations director. When your discovery threatened to expose their Edwards Plateau site, they activated containment protocols. Emma's mind raced, connecting pieces. Frank Wilson's wallet was in that cave. Is he involved too? Dr. Carson's eyes widened slightly. You found his wallet? That's significant. Frank disappeared 2 days before the storm. The ranch hands assumed he was checking fence lines when the storm hit, but no body was recovered. You think they took him? If he discovered their operation, absolutely. Dr. Carson closed her laptop. Which brings us to your mother. Eleanor, what could my mother possibly have to do with this? Your mother worked for the original Operation Silk Road in 1987. Back then, it was a legitimate USDA program studying crossbreeding of disease-resistant cattle. Eleanor Fletcher was one of their top field researchers before she married and took over your family ranch. The revelation struck Emma like a physical blow. Her mother, the woman who'd spent her life raising cattle and tending their modest ranch, had been a government researcher. It seemed impossible, yet fragments of memories suddenly aligned. Eleanor's detailed record-keeping of their herd's health, her surprisingly extensive veterinary knowledge, the scientific journals that arrived monthly even after her father's death. Helix appropriated the old code name for their new operation, Dr. Carson continued. But there's more. The Brahman breeding program your mother worked on produced some extraordinary results. Cattle with unusual intelligence and problem-solving abilities. The program was eventually shut down as priorities shifted, but the research data remained. Emma's gaze drifted to the window where Daisy stood vigilant watch over her calf. Are you suggesting Daisy is descended from those research animals? It's more than possible. The way she tracked her calf, sought human help specifically, those behaviors align with what the original Silk Road program was developing. Enhanced spatial memory, recognition of human intent, problem-solving in novel situations. This is, Emma struggled for words, a lot to process, Dr. Carson finished for her. But we don't have much time. If Keating and Mercer realize you've gone off-grid with knowledge of their operation, they'll take extreme measures. As if summoned by her words, Emma's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Collins. She answered cautiously. Fletcher, they know you're gone. The deputy's voice was urgent, hushed. Keating's called in state troopers claiming you've stolen evidence in a federal investigation. They've got an APB out. Where are you? Carson's clinic, checking on Titan. What's your situation? They're questioning me, but I'm sticking to the story about your mother having an emergency. Listen, something else. They found more of those caterpillars at 3 other sites in the conservation area. This is bigger than we thought. Stay safe, Collins. I'll be in touch when I can. Emma ended the call, turning to Dr. Carson. We need to move. They'll check here eventually. The veterinarian nodded grimly. Titan isn't stable enough for transport yet. The next dose of antivenom is critical. I can't leave him. What about Daisy? She's uninjured but won't leave without her calf. The maternal bond is too strong. Emma paced the small office, mind racing through options. I need to see my mother. If she was involved in the original Silk Road, she might know something that could help us understand what we're dealing with. Cedar Pines has strict visiting hours, Dr. Carson pointed out. I'm not going to Cedar Pines. Emma's decision crystallized as she spoke. I'm taking her out of there. If Keating and Mercer connect her to this, she's in danger too. Dr. Carson seemed to weigh the situation before opening a drawer and removing a set of keys. Take my truck. It's registered under my brother's name. They won't be looking for it. There's a go bag in the back with cash and some supplies. What about you and the animals? I've got protocols for emergencies. Once Titan is stable enough to move, I'll transport them both to my property in Blanco County. It's remote, defensible, and off official records. She scribbled an address on a prescription pad. Meet us there when you can. As Emma prepared to leave, Dr. Carson placed a firm hand on her arm. One more thing. Daisy isn't just smart. She's valuable. If she truly is descended from the original Silk Road program, her genetics alone would be worth millions to the right buyers. And if Helix realizes what she represents, the implication hung in the air between them. Emma nodded her understanding. I'll protect them both, she promised, glancing once more at the cow, keeping steadfast vigil over her injured calf. Outside, the Texas night enveloped her in velvety darkness as she approached Dr. Carson's truck, a nondescript gray Ford F-150 with mud-splattered license plates. As she slid behind the wheel, her phone buzzed with another incoming call. This time, the nursing home's number flashed on the screen. Mr. Fletcher, this is Nurse Abernathy from Cedar Pines. I'm calling about your mother. Emma's heart clenched. What's happened? Nothing to panic about, the nurse assured her, though tension underlay her professional tone. But there were some men here asking to speak with Eleanor about an hour ago. They claimed to be from the Veterans Affairs Office, but their identification seemed unusual. When we insisted on contacting you first, they became rather insistent. Did they speak to her? No. Head nurse Jenkins refused without family consent. They left, but she hesitated. One of them said they'd return with proper authorization in the morning. Cold dread settled in Emma's stomach. I'm coming to get her tonight. Have her ready in 30 minutes. Miss Fletcher, that's against protocols for discharge. This is an emergency, Nurse Abernathy. My mother's safety is at risk. Emma started the truck's engine. 30 minutes. And please, don't tell anyone I called. As she pulled away from the veterinary clinic, Emma's mind filled with fragmented thoughts. Her mother's secret past, deadly South American caterpillars breeding in Texas caves, a corporation repurposing government research for unknown ends, and a cow with extraordinary intelligence who'd somehow led them into the middle of it all. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness as she accelerated onto the main highway, keenly aware that with each passing minute, the net around her grew tighter. She had violated direct orders, stolen evidence, and was now planning to remove her mother from supervised medical care, actions that would appear increasingly suspicious to authorities already searching for her. Yet beneath the fear and confusion burned a steadily growing anger. Someone had turned her conservation area into a breeding ground for deadly invasive species. Someone had threatened her mother, endangered innocent animals, and corrupted the institutions she'd dedicated her career to serving. As the highway unfurled before her, Emma made a silent vow. Whatever Helix Security was planning, whatever Keating and Mercer were hiding, she would expose it, even if it cost her everything. The digital clock on the dashboard read 9:47 p.m. She had 30 minutes to reach Cedar Pines, collect her mother, and disappear before Keating's net closed around them. And somewhere in Eleanor Fletcher's fragmented memories lay answers that might explain how a mother cow's desperate search for her calf had uncovered a conspiracy decades in the making. Cedar Pines Nursing and Rehabilitation Center rose like a pale monolith against the night sky, its institutional architecture softened by half-hearted landscaping efforts, azaleas struggling in the Texas heat, live oaks providing meager shade to concrete benches where residents rarely sat. At night, the facility's fluorescent lighting cast a sickly glow through Venetian blinds, creating alternating bars of light and shadow across the visitor parking lot. Emma parked Dr. Carson's truck in the far corner of the lot, away from security cameras she knew monitored the main entrance. 3 years of visiting her mother had taught her the rhythms of the place. Shift changes at 11 p.m., security guard rounds every 2 hours, which doors remained unlocked for staff cigarette breaks. Knowledge that now served a purpose she'd never anticipated. Instead of approaching the main entrance, she circled to the service area where kitchen deliveries arrived each morning. A single security light illuminated the loading dock, but the side door, used by staff for smoke breaks, remained in shadow. Emma had befriended enough of the night shift nurses to know the door would be propped open slightly during the quieter evening hours. Her phone vibrated with an incoming text as she approached the building. 2 men in black Suburban parked across street. Watching building. Hurry. Abernathy. Emma's pulse quickened. She scanned the surroundings before slipping through the service entrance, finding the familiar institutional corridor that led past the kitchen and laundry facilities. The smell of industrial detergent and lingering dinner aromas, overcooked vegetables and processed meat, filled the air. Nurse Abernathy was waiting at the junction where service corridors met the residential wing, her round face tight with concern beneath tightly curled gray hair. "I don't know what kind of trouble you're in," she whispered as Emma approached, "but those men aren't from Veterans Affairs. One had a gun under his jacket. I saw it when he reached for his credentials." "Where's my mother?" "Room 237, as always. I've packed her essential medications and some clothes." Abernathy handed over a small duffel bag. "Janet's helping her dress. You'll need to use the east exit. I've disabled the alarm temporarily." Emma gripped the nurse's hand. "Thank you. I can't explain everything now, but Mom's in danger." "I've worked with Eleanor for 3 years," Abernathy replied with unexpected fierceness. "She may be confused sometimes, but she's a good woman. Whatever's happening, I trust you're doing right by her." The residential corridor stretched before her, identical doors lining both sides, room numbers and residents' names displayed in plastic holders. The night lighting was dimmed to encourage sleep, creating pools of shadow between overhead fixtures. Emma moved quickly but quietly, acknowledging the night nurse at the station with a casual nod that suggested nothing out of the ordinary. Room 237's door stood slightly ajar, warm light spilling into the corridor. Emma entered to find Eleanor seated on the edge of her bed, dressed in slacks and a button-up blouse, her white hair neatly combed. Despite her diminished cognitive state, Eleanor Fletcher maintained the dignified bearing that had characterized her throughout life, spine straight, chin lifted, hands folded precisely in her lap. Nurse Janet, a younger woman with kind eyes and efficient movements, was helping Eleanor with her shoes. She looked up as Emma entered, relief evident in her expression. "Your daughter's here, Eleanor," she announced, louder than necessary, as if volume could penetrate cognitive confusion. Eleanor's eyes, the same clear blue as Emma's own, focused slowly, recognition dawning like a gradual sunrise. "Emmy?" she said, her voice stronger than Emma had expected. "Is it Sunday already?" "No, Mom. We're going for a little trip. Janet and Nurse Abernathy have helped you pack." Eleanor nodded, accepting this deviation from routine with surprising equanimity. "A trip. That's nice. Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe," Emma answered, helping her mother to stand. "Some men might be looking for you, asking questions about your work a long time ago. Do you remember Operation Silk Road?" The effect of the words was immediate and startling. Eleanor's posture stiffened, her gaze sharpening with sudden clarity. "Silk Road? They've found it after all these years?" Emma and Janet exchanged shocked glances at this moment of lucidity. "We need to go, Mom." "I'll explain more in the car." Janet helped Emma guide Eleanor into a wheelchair, standard protocol for moving residents through the facility, regardless of their ambulatory status. "East exit, like Abernathy said," the nurse murmured. "I'll create a distraction at the front desk if those men come in." Emma wheeled her mother swiftly down the corridor toward the east wing, heart pounding at every sound. Most residents were asleep, but occasionally a door would open, an elderly face peering curiously at their passage before retreating back into private darkness. The east exit, used primarily for garden access during daylight hours, was secured with an alarm system that now showed the steady green light of deactivation rather than the usual red. Emma sent a silent thanks to Nurse Abernathy as she pushed the door open, revealing a small patio and a gently sloping ramp leading to a side parking area. "Just a bit further, Mom," she encouraged, navigating the wheelchair down the ramp. Eleanor remained unnaturally quiet, her earlier moment of clarity apparently faded. Her fingers worked nervously at the fabric of her slacks, a self-soothing gesture Emma had observed countless times during visits. They had almost reached the truck when headlights swept across the parking lot as a vehicle turned in from the main road. Emma froze, pulling the wheelchair into the shadow of an ornamental hedge. The black Suburban circled slowly, its tinted windows revealing nothing of the occupants as it cruised past their hiding place and continued toward the main entrance. "They're looking for us," Emma whispered, more to herself than to Eleanor. "The samples," Eleanor murmured suddenly, her voice faint but clear. "They mustn't get the samples." Emma stared at her mother, questions multiplying, but this wasn't the time or place. With renewed urgency, she helped Eleanor from the wheelchair into the passenger seat of Dr. Carson's truck, securing her seatbelt before returning the wheelchair to the building's edge where it would eventually be found. She slid behind the wheel and started the engine, keeping the headlights off as she navigated slowly through the back exit of the parking lot, heart hammering against her ribs until they merged onto a county road leading away from Cedar Pines. Only then did she activate the lights, checking repeatedly in the rearview mirror for signs of pursuit. "Mom," she began carefully, "I need you to try to remember. What was Operation Silk Road? What samples were you talking about?" Eleanor gazed out the window at the passing landscape, streetlights occasionally illuminating her profile, the strong jaw, high cheekbones, and intelligent eyes that had characterized her before illness began its cruel erosion. "The cows," she replied after a long silence. "Special breeding program. Smarter than any cattle had a right to be." Her hand made a vague gesture. "They shut us down. Said it was budget cuts. But it was politics, always politics. Why would anyone be looking for you now after all these years?" Eleanor turned to face her daughter, confusion clouding her features. "Years? No. The samples are in the barn, behind the feed bins. Robert said to keep them safe." Her voice cracked slightly. "Robert will be home tomorrow. He's just checking the north pasture fence." Emma's heart constricted painfully. Robert Fletcher, her father, had been dead for 15 years, killed by the same heart attack that had forced them to sell most of their ranch land to cover debts. In her increasingly frequent moments of confusion, Eleanor often spoke of him as if he were simply in another room or out working the property. "The samples, Mom," Emma pressed gently. "What kind of samples?" "DNA, breeding records, the special bloodlines." Eleanor's fingers worried at her slacks again. "They wanted to weaponize them, you know. Not just smart cows, war cows." She gave a sudden, sharp laugh that contained no humor. "Imagine that. Using something beautiful for something terrible. Humans always do that, don't they?" Emma's phone vibrated with an incoming call. Collins again. She answered using the truck's Bluetooth system. "Fletcher, where are you?" His voice filled the cab, tense and urgent. "On the move with my mother." "What's happening?" "They've escalated the search. Keating told state police you stole biological samples that represent a public health threat. They're setting up checkpoints on major highways." Emma's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Collins, I need you to look up something in the old records. Operation Silk Road, 1987. It was a USDA cattle breeding program. My mother was involved." "What does that have to do with—" Everything, I think. Carson filled me in on some background. The Lonomia breeding operation is run by a private military contractor called Helix Security. They've appropriated the name of my mother's old research program, and I think they're after her for some reason. Collins was silent for a moment. I'll see what I can find. Where are you headed? Emma hesitated, conscious of the possibility that their communication might be monitored. Taking Mom somewhere safe. I'll contact you when I can. After ending the call, Emma guided the truck onto smaller county roads, avoiding major highways where checkpoints might be established. The Texas night enveloped them, stars brilliant in the vast sky above, the landscape reduced to shadowy silhouettes of mesquite, live oak, and rolling hills. Eleanor had fallen silent again, her brief period of lucidity fading like a candle flame in wind. She stared out the window, occasionally murmuring names Emma didn't recognize. Colleagues, perhaps, from a scientific life her daughter had never known. As they drove, Emma's thoughts returned to Daisy and Titan, the extraordinary cow who had led them to her injured calf, demonstrating intelligence and determination beyond normal animal behavior. If Eleanor's cryptic references to smart cows were accurate, if Daisy truly was descended from that research bloodline, it would explain her remarkable actions. But it didn't explain why a private military contractor was breeding deadly caterpillars in hidden caves, or why they would be interested in decades-old cattle breeding research. The pieces remained frustratingly disconnected. An hour into their journey, Emma's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Carson. Titan stabilized. Moving to secure location. Found something in his blood work you need to see. Before she could contemplate what that might mean, headlights appeared in her rearview mirror, approaching rapidly from behind. The vehicle's high beams activated, flooding the truck's cab with harsh light. "Hold on, Mom," Emma warned, pressing the accelerator as the pursuing vehicle closed the distance. The truck responded sluggishly, its engine no match for what appeared to be a powerful SUV now riding their bumper. Emma scanned the road ahead, looking for options. The two-lane county road offered few opportunities for evasion, bordered on both sides by barbed wire fencing protecting private ranch land. The SUV swerved into the oncoming lane, accelerating alongside them. Emma caught a glimpse of the driver, a man in tactical clothing, his face partially obscured by what appeared to be night vision goggles. Not local law enforcement. Not state police. Something far more concerning. "Emmy?" Eleanor's voice quavered with the first notes of fear. "What's happening?" "It's okay, Mom. Just hold tight." The SUV swerved toward them, its side panels scraping against the truck with a horrific sound of metal on metal. Emma fought the steering wheel as the truck shuddered from the impact, tires momentarily losing traction on the asphalt. The SUV dropped back, preparing for another run. Emma's mind raced through limited options. The truck wasn't built for speed or maneuverability. Their pursuers were clearly trained and determined. Direct confrontation would end badly. A weathered wooden sign flashed past. Miller's Creek Ranch. Private property. No trespassing. Recognition flared in Emma's memory. Miller's Creek. One of the properties bordering the conservation area's northern boundary. She'd responded to trespassing complaints there numerous times, navigating its complicated network of ranch roads, cattle paths, and dry creek beds. Making a split-second decision, Emma wrenched the steering wheel, sending the truck crashing through the barbed wire fence. The vehicle bucked violently as it left the asphalt, bouncing across uneven ranch land. Behind them, the SUV's brakes squealed as the driver attempted to react to the unexpected maneuver. "Hold on!" Emma shouted as they plunged down an embankment into the dry creek bed that gave the ranch its name. The truck slammed against the rocky bottom, suspension groaning in protest. Eleanor cried out, bracing herself against the dashboard. Emma gunned the engine, following the creek bed deeper into the property. Her ranger knowledge of the local topography offered their only advantage. The creek curved northward, eventually connecting with a network of ranch roads that could lead them to the conservation area's maintenance access points. In the rearview mirror, she saw the SUV hesitate at the broken fence line before following their path, powerful engine roaring as it descended into the creek bed. Their lead was minimal, their vehicle outmatched. "Emmy?" Eleanor's voice was surprisingly steady now, fear apparently having triggered another moment of clarity. "The old Thompson place. Go there." Emma glanced at her mother in surprise. "What?" "The old Thompson place," Eleanor repeated insistently. "Where we kept the special herd. There's a cellar. Safe." The Thompson property, Emma vaguely recalled it from childhood, a defunct ranch bordering their old family land, abandoned decades ago after some financial scandal. She'd played in its empty barn as a child, never questioning why her mother occasionally visited the seemingly worthless property. "Mom, that's 10 miles from here. We can't—" "Underground tunnels," Eleanor interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "From the creek to the cellar, Cold War fallout shelter. Robert showed me, for emergencies." Her blue eyes, suddenly sharp with memory, fixed on her daughter's face. "This is an emergency, isn't it?" Emma stared at her mother in astonishment as pieces clicked into place. The certainty in Eleanor's voice, the specific details, this wasn't confusion or delusion. This was genuine memory surfacing through the fog of her condition. The SUV was gaining behind them, powerful headlights illuminating the creek bed ahead of their own beams. Emma made her decision, trusting her mother's suddenly clear recollection. "Where exactly, Mom? How do we find it?" 3 bends in the creek. After the lightning-struck oak. Look for the concrete culvert on the right. Looks collapsed. Isn't. Emma followed the creek bed, scanning desperately for the landmarks Eleanor had described. The truck bounced violently over rocks and debris, mechanical protests growing louder with each impact. The pursuing SUV was less than 50 yards behind now, gaining steadily. They rounded a sharp bend in the creek, then another. Ahead, illuminated briefly in their headlights, stood the skeletal remains of an ancient oak, its upper portion blackened and splintered by some long-ago lightning strike. "There!" Eleanor pointed with surprising precision. "The 3rd bend is just ahead. Slow down or you'll miss it." Emma eased off the accelerator, fighting the urge to maintain speed with their pursuers so close behind. Her mother's memory had to be trusted now, their only chance. The creek bed widened, then curved sharply left. As they navigated the turn, Eleanor cried out, "There! The culvert!" Almost hidden by overgrown mesquite and catclaw acacia, a concrete structure emerged from the creek bank, a drainage culvert that appeared to have partially collapsed decades ago. Emma would have dismissed it as exactly what it appeared to be, but her mother's certainty was compelling. She guided the truck toward the structure, headlights illuminating what seemed to be impenetrable rubble and vegetation. "It's blocked," Emma said desperately, the SUV's lights growing brighter behind them. "Illusion," Eleanor insisted. "Robert designed it that way. The collapse is fake." "Drive through it." With the pursuing vehicle nearly upon them and no other options, Emma made the desperate choice to trust her mother's impossible-seeming instructions. She aimed the truck directly at the seemingly solid debris and pressed the accelerator. Instead of the devastating impact she half expected, the truck pushed through artificial barriers disguised as collapsed concrete and debris, revealing a dark tunnel beyond. Emma hit the brakes immediately, the truck skidding to a halt in pitch darkness. Behind them, headlights illuminated the fake barrier they'd penetrated, realistic enough to fool a casual observer, especially at night. "Turn off the lights," Eleanor commanded. "They won't see the entrance if they don't know it's there." Emma complied, shutting down the engine and extinguishing all lights. They sat in complete darkness, breath held, as the pursuing SUV roared past their hidden entrance, continuing down the creek bed in search of quarry that had seemingly vanished. In the sudden silence, Emma turned to her mother, barely able to discern her outline in the darkness. "Mom, what is this place? And how did you remember it so clearly?" Eleanor's voice came quietly through the darkness, steady and clear. "Some memories never fade, Emmy, especially ones tied to fear. I always knew this day might come, that they'd want what we hid." "Who, Mom? Who is they?" "The ones who wanted to turn something good into something terrible." Eleanor's hand found Emma's in the darkness, squeezing with surprising strength. "The same ones who are after your special cow and her calf now." The darkness surrounding them was absolute, the silence broken only by their breathing and the occasional ping of the truck's cooling engine. Emma fumbled in the glove compartment, finding a flashlight among Dr. Carson's emergency supplies. Its beam revealed a concrete tunnel extending forward into darkness, large enough to accommodate their vehicle but only barely. "We should drive forward," Eleanor instructed with surprising authority. "About 200 yards. There's a chamber big enough to turn around in and a door to the shelter." Emma stared at her mother, this sudden clarity both a gift and a mystery. "Mom, how is it possible you remember all this so clearly? At Cedar Pines, you sometimes couldn't recall what day it was." Eleanor's lined face, half illuminated by the flashlight beam, showed a hint of the formidable woman she'd once been. "Dementia's strange that way, Emmy. Recent memories slip away like water through fingers. But the important things, the ones charged with emotion, fear, love, purpose, they stay anchored somehow." She gestured toward the tunnel. This place was important. It meant survival. Starting the engine again, Emma guided the truck slowly forward, headlights illuminating smooth concrete walls that showed little deterioration despite decades of abandonment. The tunnel curved gently, sloping slightly downward until it opened into a larger chamber, just as Eleanor had described. The headlights revealed rusted equipment pushed against walls, empty shelving units, and a heavy metal door in the far wall. "Cold War paranoia had its uses," Eleanor commented as Emma parked. "The government paid Robert's father good money to build this place. Fallout shelter, emergency communications post, supply cache. When the USSR collapsed, they abandoned it. Most folks forgot it was ever here. But not you and Dad. We kept it maintained, quietly, stocked it with basics. Just in case." Eleanor's voice softened. "After your father died, I couldn't manage it anymore. But the structure is sound. Concrete and steel don't rot away so easily." Emma helped her mother from the truck, supporting her as they approached the metal door. A simple mechanical combination lock secured it, no electronics to fail over time. "The combination," Emma prompted gently. Eleanor's fingers traced the numbered dial with practiced familiarity. "Robert's birthday, my birthday, the day we met." The lock clicked open under her touch, and the heavy door swung inward with surprising ease on well-oiled hinges. The flashlight beam revealed a space approximately 30 feet square, with concrete walls, floor, and ceiling. Metal shelving units lined 3 walls, some still holding dusty supplies, canned goods long past expiration, first aid kits, blankets sealed in plastic. A generator sat in one corner beside containers of fuel. A small table and chairs occupied the center of the room, and a military-style cot stood against the far wall. "Someone's been maintaining it," Emma realized, noting the absence of cobwebs and the relatively clean floor. "Your father's old friend, Jim Tucker," Eleanor explained, sinking gratefully into one of the chairs. "He promised Robert he'd keep an eye on things. Comes by every few months to check the generator, replace supplies." Emma located a battery-powered lantern on one of the shelves and switched it on, filling the room with soft light that allowed her to turn off the flashlight. The shelter was basic but functional, a place designed for survival rather than comfort. Why did you and Dad keep this place a secret, even from me? Eleanor's gaze drifted to the shelving units against the back wall. Because of what we stored here, what we were protecting. She pointed toward a section of shelving that appeared identical to the others. Behind there, hidden compartment in the wall, that's where the Silk Road records are kept. Moving to the indicated shelf, Emma found it was mounted on concealed hinges, swinging outward to reveal a recessed safe built into the concrete wall. Once again, a mechanical combination lock secured it. Same combination? She asked. Eleanor nodded. Your father wasn't complicated when it came to such things. The safe door opened to reveal several weatherproof document cases, external hard drives from an earlier computing era, and a small refrigeration unit running on a separate power supply. Inside the unit, neatly labeled test tubes and sample containers were arranged in protective racks. DNA samples, Eleanor explained, seeing Emma's questioning look. From the special breeding lines preserved properly, DNA can last decades. Emma carefully removed one of the document cases and opened it on the table. Inside were hundreds of pages of research notes, breeding records, genetic analyses, and photographs of cattle that looked remarkably similar to Daisy. The Brahman Enhanced Cognition Program, she read from the cover page. Operation Silk Road. We were trying to develop cattle with enhanced problem-solving abilities, Eleanor explained, her voice stronger now, animated by memory. Livestock that could adapt to changing climate conditions, navigate difficult terrain independently, recognize and avoid environmental threats without human guidance. Self-sufficient cattle herds, Emma translated, scanning the documents. Exactly. Imagine cattle that could find water during drought conditions, avoid predators intelligently, even recognize when one of their own was ill and separate them to prevent disease spread. Eleanor's eyes shone with remembered purpose. We made remarkable progress. The fifth-generation subjects demonstrated cognitive abilities far beyond standard livestock. Spatial memory, facial recognition, cause and effect reasoning, even rudimentary tool use. Emma looked up sharply. Tool use? In cattle? Simple applications. Using branches to scratch inaccessible areas. Pushing objects together to create stepping platforms to reach food. Nothing revolutionary by primate standards, but unprecedented in bovines. Eleanor tapped one of the photographs showing a silver-gray Brahman cow remarkably similar to Daisy. This was our star subject, designation SRP 517. We called her Silver. The resemblance to Daisy was uncanny, the same intelligent eyes, distinctive head shape, and imposing presence. Is Daisy a descendant? Almost certainly. When the program was shut down, we dispersed the breeding stock to various ranches, hiding them in plain sight among normal cattle populations. The genetic traits were dominant enough to persist even with conventional breeding. Emma struggled to process the implications. But why was the program shut down? And why all this secrecy? Eleanor's expression darkened. Because certain interests saw different potential in our work, not resilient food sources, but military applications. Enhanced animals for surveillance, transport in difficult terrain, even combat situations. She shook her head in disgust. They wanted to weaponize what we'd created. Turn a program meant to strengthen food security into something that could harm people. And you refused. The entire research team refused. We destroyed key research components, obscured our most significant findings, and scattered the breeding stock. The official record shows Operation Silk Road was terminated due to budget constraints and inconclusive results. A thin smile crossed Eleanor's face. Amazing how many project notes can be accidentally corrupted or misplaced when researchers put their minds to it. But someone knew the truth, Emma concluded. And now they're after the records and samples you preserved. I always feared they might come looking eventually." Eleanor gestured toward the documents spread across the table. "The research has significant commercial value, even without military applications. Cattle that can essentially manage themselves, that could revolutionize ranching, especially in developing regions." Emma's phone buzzed with an incoming text from Dr. Carson. "Analysis complete. Titan's blood shows genetic markers consistent with enhanced bovine intelligence program. Similar markers in Daisy's DNA sample. They're hunting these bloodlines. Call me." The text confirmed what Eleanor had just revealed, creating an unsettling convergence of past and present. "We need to contact Dr. Carson," Emma decided. "She's treating Titan and protecting Daisy. If Helix Security is after these enhanced bloodlines, they're both in danger." Eleanor frowned. "Olivia Carson? The veterinarian?" "Yes." "You know her?" "Not personally, but her name appears in later records related to Operation Silk Road after our phase ended." Eleanor's expression grew troubled. "She worked for Interbio Pharmaceuticals. They were among those most interested in the military applications." This revelation sent a chill through Emma. "Carson told me she left Interbio when she discovered they were weaponizing her research. She's been helping us protect Titan and Daisy. Perhaps, or perhaps she's playing a deeper game." Eleanor's eyes, sharp with returned clarity, held her daughter's gaze. "Trust must be earned, Emmy, not given freely, especially when the stakes are this high." Before Emma could respond, her phone rang. Collins calling. "Fletcher, we've got a situation." The deputy's voice was tense. "I dug into those Operation Silk Road records like you asked. Most files are classified or missing, but I found personnel lists. Your mother was there, all right." So was Richard Keating. Keating? Emma felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath her. "My supervisor was part of Operation Silk Road?" "Not just part of it. According to these records, he was military liaison to the project. Captain Richard Keating, Army Special Programs Office." Emma's gaze shot to Eleanor, who nodded grimly. "Richard Keating. I should have recognized him," she murmured. "It's been so many years and his appearance has changed, but yes, he was the military's representative. One of those most interested in weaponization possibilities." "There's more," Collins continued. "I tracked Frank Wilson's background. Before buying Sunflower Ranch 5 years ago, he worked for Interbio Pharmaceuticals as a senior project manager. And get this, Dr. Olivia Carson was his direct subordinate." The pieces were falling into place with disturbing implications. Frank Wilson, owner of Sunflower Ranch and keeper of Daisy and Titan, Dr. Carson, supposedly opposed to weaponization research, but connected to both Interbio and Wilson. Keating, the military liaison, now in position as Parks and Wildlife Supervisor. All three connected to Operation Silk Road or its corporate successor. "Collins, where are you now?" Emma asked urgently. "Still at headquarters. Keating's got every available officer searching for you. They're saying you've stolen classified biological materials that pose a public health threat. I need you to get to Dr. Carson's clinic. Check if Titan and Daisy are still there. But be careful. Don't let anyone know where you're going." "Already on it. I've got a bad feeling about all this, Fletcher." After ending the call, Emma turned to her mother. "We can't trust anyone right now. Not until we understand who's on which side." Eleanor nodded, fatigue beginning to show in the slump of her shoulders as the adrenaline of their escape faded. The samples and records must be protected. In the wrong hands. "First, we need rest," Emma decided, noting her mother's exhaustion. "Then we'll figure out our next move." She helped Eleanor to the cot, covering her with a sealed blanket from the shelves. Within minutes, the older woman had drifted into sleep, the exertion and stress having taken their toll on her fragile health. Alone with her thoughts, Emma returned to the research materials, reading through decades-old reports detailing the remarkable cognitive abilities developed in the Operation Silk Road cattle. The researchers' excitement was evident in their notes. They had believed they were developing livestock that could thrive with minimal human intervention, a potential solution to food security challenges in a changing climate. Instead, they'd created something that others saw as a potential weapon or lucrative proprietary technology. Something worth killing for, apparently, given the lengths to which Helix Security seemed prepared to go. Her phone buzzed again, another text from Dr. Carson. Frank Wilson found alive, being held at my clinic, badly injured. Says Keating tortured him for information about Daisy's bloodline. Need your help. Emma stared at the message, uncertainty coiling through her. Was Carson telling the truth, or was this an attempt to lure her into a trap? The connection between Carson, Wilson, and Interbio suggested potential collusion, yet Carson had helped them save Titan and had provided crucial information about Helix Security. Before she could decide how to respond, another message arrived, this one from Collins. At Carson's clinic, place deserted. No sign of Titan, Daisy, Carson, or staff. Signs of struggle. Blood on floor. Call me ASAP. The contradictory messages confirmed Emma's worst fears. Someone was lying. Someone was setting a trap. And the lives of two remarkable animals, and perhaps many more, hung in the balance. Her gaze returned to her sleeping mother, then to the genetic samples and research that represented decades of scientific work. Whatever Helix Security wanted with the enhanced cattle bloodlines, it couldn't be beneficial to the animals themselves. Military applications rarely prioritize the welfare of their assets. Emma made her decision. She carefully repacked the research materials and DNA samples, selecting the most critical items that could fit in her backpack. Then she composed a text to both Carson and Collins, using carefully chosen words that would reveal the truth through their responses. Meeting you both at the original testing site. Eleanor says Silver's offspring will recognize the location, bringing original genetic samples for comparison. The message contained information only the real Dr. Carson would understand if she was truly connected to the original research. It mentioned a location that didn't exist in those terms, which would force any imposter to reveal themselves by pretending knowledge they couldn't possibly have. Within moments, 2 responses arrived. From Carson. Understood. The old Thompson North Pasture Facility. Silver was designation SRP 517. We'll meet you there at dawn. From Collins. Fletcher, I don't know what you're talking about, but Carson's clinic looks like a crime scene. Found tracking devices planted in your Ranger vehicle. Don't trust anyone right now. Stay hidden. The contrast between responses told Emma everything she needed to know. Carson had correctly identified Silver's designation number. Information Emma had only just learned from her mother's records. Information that wouldn't be in any database Collins could access. Emma now faced an impossible decision. Trust Carson, who had connections to Interbio, but also demonstrated knowledge that suggested legitimate ties to the original research, or trust Collins, whose warning about tracking devices and the abandoned clinic suggested genuine concern. Outside their concrete shelter, dawn would soon break across the Texas landscape, and with it would come renewed searches, more danger, and the need to make choices that could determine the fate of not just Daisy and Titan, but potentially an entire lineage of remarkable animals that had never been intended for the purposes others now envisioned for them. Eleanor stirred on the cot, murmuring in her sleep. Despite her dementia, she had remembered what mattered most when it truly counted. The question now was whether Emma could protect what her mother had spent decades keeping safe. Dawn broke over the Texas hill country with the gradual certainty of a tide, washing pale gold light across limestone ridges and oak-studded valleys. Inside the concrete shelter, Emma startled awake at the sound of her phone's alarm, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. She had dozed off in the chair after hours of reading through her mother's research files, her head resting on folded arms at the metal table. Eleanor still slept on the cot, her breathing steady but shallow, face relaxed, in a way it rarely was during waking hours. The brief period of clarity that had guided them to safety seemed to have ebbed, leaving Emma uncertain whether her mother would wake with the same lucidity or return to her more confused state. The phone showed 3 missed calls from Collins and another text from Carson. "At the Thompson place. Frank needs medical attention. Titan and Daisy secure for now. Please hurry." Emma weighed her options carefully. Carson knew details about Operation Silk Road that suggested legitimate connection to the original research. Collins had found her clinic abandoned with signs of struggle. Both couldn't be telling the truth. Unless a third possibility formed in Emma's mind. What if Carson had been forced to abandon her clinic under duress? What if she had managed to transport the animals to safety, but was now being coerced into setting a trap? Emma dialed Collins, keeping her voice low to avoid waking Eleanor. "Where are you?" she asked when he answered. "Back at my place, off duty. Keating's furious that I lost track of you. He's got roadblocks on every major highway in the county." Collins sounded exhausted. "Fletcher, this is bigger than we thought. I found records of shipments from Brazil to Interbio facilities in Texas dating back 3 years, all cleared through agricultural inspection by Richard Keating's authorization. The caterpillars," Emma concluded. "He's been facilitating their importation. Not just caterpillars, dozens of different venomous species from South America, Australia, Africa, and get this, the shipping manifests list the recipient as Helix Biological Research, care of Olivia Carson, DVM. Emma's blood ran cold. Carson's directly involved in the importation program? On paper, at least. But here's where it gets strange. I checked her veterinary license records. 2 years ago, she filed a whistleblower complaint against Interbio with the FDA, alleging illegal animal testing protocols. The complaint was dismissed after review, but she was terminated from the company a month later. This aligned with what Carson had told Emma about leaving the company over ethical concerns. But it didn't explain the shipping manifests in her name. Someone could be using her credentials without her knowledge, Emma suggested. Maybe. Or she's playing both sides. Hard to know who to trust in this mess. What about Frank Wilson? Any sign of him? Nothing. His ranch hands reported him missing the day before the storm, but with everything else happening, the investigation got sidelined. Emma made her decision. "I need to go to the Thompson place." Carson claims she's there with Frank, Titan, and Daisy. "Sounds like a trap," Collins warned. "Probably. But it's also where the original Operation Silk Road testing was conducted. If there's evidence that could help us understand what's happening, it might be there." She glanced at her mother's sleeping form. "I can't bring Mom. It's too dangerous. Can you come get her? Bring her somewhere safe?" Collins didn't hesitate. "Text me the coordinates. I'll be there in an hour." After ending the call, Emma gently woke Eleanor, explaining the situation as simply as possible. Her mother seemed less lucid than the previous night, but understood enough to agree to go with Collins when he arrived. "The samples," Eleanor insisted, pointing to Emma's backpack. "Keep them safe. They're proof." "I will, Mom. I promise." Using the shelter's basic facilities, Emma freshened up as best she could and inventoried the supplies in Dr. Carson's go-bag: cash, a small first aid kit, protein bars, a multi-tool, and, most usefully, a compact pair of binoculars. She added these to her own ranger gear and the critical research samples, creating a kit that balanced mobility with preparedness. When Collins arrived an hour later, Having navigated the hidden entrance with Emma's guidance, his exhausted expression confirmed the intensity of the ongoing search. "Keating's called in state police and border patrol," he reported. "They're using the public health threat as justification. Roadblocks everywhere, helicopters scheduled for aerial searches starting at noon." "How did you get through?" "Back roads and a badge, but it won't work much longer. They're tightening the net by the hour." Emma helped her mother into Collins's personal vehicle, a weathered pickup truck less likely to draw attention than his official cruiser. "Take her to my cousin's place in Marble Falls," she instructed, providing the address. "Sarah doesn't ask questions, and the property is remote enough to stay under the radar for a while." "What about you?" Collins asked as Eleanor settled into the passenger seat. "I'm going to the Thompson place. If Carson is telling the truth, Titan and Daisy are there. If not—" She left the implication hanging. "You think those animals are worth risking your life for?" There was no judgment in Collins's question, only genuine curiosity. Emma thought about Daisy's extraordinary journey to find her calf, the intelligence and determination that transcended normal animal behavior. "They're more than just animals, Collins. They represent decades of research that could help solve food security issues worldwide. And they deserve better than becoming military assets or research subjects." The older deputy nodded, seeming to accept her reasoning. "Be careful, Fletcher. I've got a feeling we're only seeing the surface of whatever's really going on here." After they departed, Emma returned to Dr. Carson's truck. The Thompson property lay approximately 15 miles northeast, once adjacent to her family's former ranch, now surrounded by larger commercial operations. According to her mother's records, it had served as the field testing facility for the Operation Silk Road cattle, its isolation perfect for observing their behavior without interference. The journey required careful navigation to avoid main roads. Emma stuck to ranch access paths, dry creek beds, and county maintenance routes, grateful for her ranger's knowledge of the local landscape. Twice she had to detour around police checkpoints visible in the distance, adding precious time to her journey. The Thompson place came into view shortly after 9 in the morning, a dilapidated ranch house and weathered barn situated in a shallow valley, surrounded by meadows now overgrown with mesquite and cedar. No vehicles were visible from her vantage point on a neighboring ridge, which immediately triggered Emma's caution. If Carson was truly there with injured Frank Wilson and 2 large animals, transportation would be necessary. Using the binoculars, Emma surveyed the property carefully. The main house appeared abandoned, windows broken or boarded, porch sagging. The barn stood in better condition, its red paint faded but structure intact. A small outbuilding, possibly a former bunkhouse, showed signs of more recent maintenance, its roof newer than the surrounding structures. Most significantly, what appeared to be a cattle paddock behind the barn contained 2 distinct forms, one large silver-gray Brahman cow and a smaller calf lying in the shade of an oak tree. Daisy and Titan were indeed here, just as Carson had claimed. But where was Carson herself? And the supposedly injured Frank Wilson? Emma circled the property on foot, maintaining cover in the tree line that bordered the western edge. As she drew closer, she could see Daisy pacing the paddock perimeter, her behavior suggesting agitation rather than calm grazing. Titan remained lying down, presumably still recovering from his injuries. The outbuilding now drew Emma's attention. Smoke rose from a small chimney, indicating occupation. A generator hummed quietly behind the structure, powering what appeared to be medical equipment visible through one window. This would be a logical place to treat an injured man. Still, something felt wrong. No vehicles, no sign of Carson. And Daisy's obvious distress suggested circumstances beyond normal containment. Emma was considering her approach when movement at the barn caught her attention. A man emerged from the large double doors, carrying what appeared to be feed toward the paddock. Even at this distance, she recognized him instantly. Richard Keating. Her supervisor moved with the confident stride of someone in control of the situation, approaching the paddock without hesitation. Daisy immediately retreated to stand protectively over Titan, her massive head lowering in a clear defensive posture. Through the binoculars, Emma watched Keating set down the feed bucket outside the paddock and withdraw what appeared to be a tranquilizer gun from his jacket. The weapon confirmed her worst fears. This was no rescue operation, but a capture. Before she could determine her next move, the outbuilding door opened. Dr. Carson emerged, followed by another figure Emma recognized from their previous encounter, Howard Mercer, the false federal agent. Between them, they half-carried, half-dragged a third person, a man whose slumped posture and bloody clothing suggested serious injury. Frank Wilson, alive, but clearly in bad shape. The trio moved toward the paddock, with Wilson apparently being used as bait to calm Daisy. The cow's reaction was immediate and surprising. She approached the fence cautiously, extending her head toward the injured rancher. The behavior suggested recognition and concern rather than fear. Emma couldn't hear their conversation from this distance, but the dynamic was clear. Carson appeared to be following Mercer's directions, her movements tense and reluctant. Wilson was barely conscious, supported between them. And Keating maintained his position with the tranquilizer gun, ready to subdue Daisy if necessary. This was the moment of truth. If Emma revealed herself, she risked immediate capture. If she didn't, Daisy and Titan would likely be sedated and transported to some Helix security facility where their remarkable genetics could be exploited. A third option formed in her mind, one that depended entirely on whether Daisy truly possessed the extraordinary intelligence her mother's research suggested. Moving quietly back toward the truck, Emma retrieved her ranger's jacket with its familiar parks and wildlife insignia, something Daisy would recognize from their earlier encounter. Then, circling to approach from behind the paddock, she used a fallen log to provide elevation above the fence line. Daisy noticed her immediately, massive head turning sharply in her direction. Emma removed her hat, making her face clearly visible, and held up her jacket where the cow could see the familiar emblem. For several tense seconds, nothing happened. Then Daisy made a decisive movement, positioning herself to block Keating's view of Emma while maintaining her protective stance over Titan. The cow understood. She recognized Emma and was deliberately providing cover. With confirmation of Daisy's remarkable awareness, Emma moved forward with her desperate plan. Using hand signals she hoped the intelligent animal might comprehend, she pointed to the fence section nearest her position, then made a braking motion with her hands. Daisy watched intently, then slowly moved toward the indicated section of fence. On the opposite side of the paddock, the humans were focused on coaxing her toward them with the injured Wilson, unaware of Emma's presence or the cow's divided attention. When Daisy reached the fence section Emma had indicated, she paused, seeming to consider. Then, with deliberate force, she pressed her massive bulk against the aging wood. The fence creaked ominously, but held. Emma made the braking motion again, more emphatically. Daisy backed up several paces, then charged the fence with her full weight, over 200 pounds of determined Brahman cow. The wood splintered with a crack that echoed across the property. Shouts of alarm rose from Keating and Mercer as they realized what was happening. Emma sprinted forward as Daisy backed up for a second charge, this one successfully breaking through the weakened fence. By the time the humans on the opposite side had reacted, Emma had reached Titan, quickly checking his condition. The young bull was alert but weak, his wounds from the caterpillar attack still healing. He struggled to stand as Daisy returned to his side, positioning herself between her calf and the approaching threat. "Stop right there, Fletcher," Keating's voice rang out as he raised the tranquilizer gun. "This is a federal operation." Stand down immediately. Emma positioned herself beside Daisy, one hand on the cow's flank in a gesture of solidarity that she hoped would communicate their alliance to observers. "Federal operation?" she called back. "Or Helix Securities' private venture? I know about Operation Silk Road, Keating, the original one and your corrupt version." Mercer had drawn a real firearm now, advancing cautiously while using Wilson as a human shield. "The research belongs to us now," he stated coldly. "Interbio legally acquired all rights when the government program was terminated." "You acquired nothing," Emma countered. "The research team deliberately obscured their findings and dispersed the breeding stock. You have no legal claim to these animals or their genetics." Dr. Carson, still supporting the injured Wilson, made a subtle movement that caught Emma's attention. She was trying to distance herself and Wilson from Mercer, creating separation. "The samples, Fletcher," Keating demanded. "We know Eleanor preserved genetic material and research notes. Where are they?" "Safe," Emma replied. "And they'll remain that way. These animals aren't weapons. They were never meant to be." "Their genetics are worth billions," Mercer snarled. "Enhanced cognitive function in livestock would revolutionize agriculture globally. Helix Security controls those patents now." Patents on research that was deliberately hidden? On genetic lines that were scattered across dozens of ranches 30 years ago? Emma laughed without humor. "Good luck enforcing that in court." As she spoke, Emma noticed Daisy making subtle movements, gradually positioning herself to block direct sight lines between the armed men and Titan. The cow's behavior continued to demonstrate remarkable situational awareness and protective instinct. "This isn't about courts," Keating stated flatly. "This is about national security." Enhanced biological assets with the capabilities these animals demonstrate have significant defense applications. "They're not assets," Emma countered, her hand still resting on Daisy's flank. "They're living creatures with intelligence that deserves respect, not exploitation." The standoff stretched taut as a wire, neither side willing to retreat. Emma knew her position was precarious, outnumbered and outgunned, with an injured calf to protect. Yet surrender would mean consigning these remarkable animals to a life of laboratory confinement and experimental exploitation. The decision was taken from her hands when Daisy suddenly bellowed, a deep, resonant sound that carried across the property. To Emma's astonishment, answering calls echoed from the surrounding hills, growing closer by the second. Keating and Mercer exchanged alarmed glances as the source of the sounds became visible, a dozen or more Brahman cattle emerging from the tree line, moving with purposeful coordination that defied normal herd behavior. "What the hell?" Mercer muttered, his weapon wavering between multiple targets now. "The dispersed bloodlines." Dr. Carson spoke for the first time, her voice carrying clearly across the paddock. "They've remained in this region for generations, breeding with conventional stock but maintaining their enhanced traits." She turned to Keating with sudden defiance. "You can't capture them all. The genetics are already out there, integrated into cattle populations across Texas." The approaching cattle moved with eerie synchronization, forming a loose circle around the property, effectively cutting off easy escape routes for the armed men. They made no aggressive moves, simply establishing presence and containment. In the momentary distraction, Dr. Carson made her move. She shoved Wilson toward Mercer, causing him to stumble, then sprinted toward Emma and the animals. "Run!" she shouted. "I've called Collins. Backup is coming." Keating fired the tranquilizer gun, but Carson's sudden movement caused the dart to miss its target. Mercer raised his firearm, but the presence of the surrounding cattle clearly gave him pause. Shooting would create panic and potential trampling danger. Emma made an instant decision, helping Dr. Carson lift Titan to his feet. The young bull struggled upright, stronger than she had expected. Daisy positioned herself protectively on his other side as they began moving toward the broken fence. "The samples," Carson urged as they retreated. "Tell me you have them." "Some," Emma confirmed. "The most important ones. My mother preserved the original genetic material." "That's what they really want," Carson explained breathlessly as they helped Titan navigate the broken fence. "Pure samples from the original research subjects before dilution through conventional breeding. With those, they could recreate the program without the decades of selective breeding." Behind them, Keating and Mercer had recovered from their surprise and were giving pursuit, but the circle of watching cattle presented an intimidating barrier. The men were forced to move cautiously, giving Emma and Carson precious time to reach the tree line with Daisy and Titan. "My truck is this way," Emma directed, guiding them toward where she'd left Dr. Carson's vehicle. "No," Carson countered. "They'll be watching for it. I have a horse trailer hidden in the old quarry half a mile east. Daisy knows the way." As if understanding, the massive Brahman cow adjusted her course, leading them eastward through the trees. Titan followed his mother with increasing strength, his recovery apparently further along than his initial appearance had suggested. "How badly is Frank injured?" Emma asked as they hurried through the underbrush. "Multiple lacerations, 2 broken ribs, severe dehydration. They tortured him for information about Daisy's bloodline and the location of the original research materials." Carson's expression hardened. "I've been treating him secretly for 3 days since I found him dumped near my clinic." "So you weren't setting a trap for me?" "Not intentionally. They intercepted my communications and forced me to send those messages." Carson's breathing was labored as they maintained their pace. "When the real Frank was found, they needed to change tactics. They brought us both here, using Frank as leverage to ensure my cooperation." The old quarry came into view. A limestone excavation abandoned decades ago, now partially reclaimed by nature. True to Carson's word, a truck and horse trailer were concealed beneath camouflage netting in a depression that had once been the quarry floor. "How did you arrange this?" Emma asked as they approached the vehicles. "I've been preparing for this possibility since I discovered what Helix was really doing with my research," Carson explained, removing the camouflage. "Emergency caches, escape routes, secure communications. When you work for people like that and decide to leave, you learn to take precautions." The sound of vehicles starting in the distance spurred them to faster action. Carson quickly prepared the trailer while Emma helped guide Titan up the ramp. Daisy followed without hesitation, positioning herself protectively beside her calf once inside. "Where's Frank?" Emma suddenly realized the injured rancher wasn't with them. "Collins has him," Carson explained, securing the trailer doors. "That's who I really called." "He arrived during the confrontation and extracted Frank while we created a distraction." This aligned with what Emma knew of the deputy's character: reliable, resourceful, and committed to doing right regardless of protocols or personal risk. As they climbed into the truck cab, Emma's phone buzzed with an incoming text from Collins. "Got Wilson. Heading to county hospital with sheriff escort. Evidence secured. Hang tight." "He made it," Emma confirmed, showing Carson the message. "But we're not safe yet. Where can we take Daisy and Titan where Helix won't find them?" Carson put the truck in gear, navigating carefully out of the quarry. "I have a wildlife rehabilitation facility in the Davis Mountains. Former research station converted to private sanctuary. It's off-grid, secure, and staffed by people I trust absolutely." "That's a 7-hour drive," Emma pointed out. "We'll never make it through the roadblocks." A smile crossed Carson's face for the first time, tired but genuine. "Who said anything about roads? I spent 3 years mapping every ranch access trail, dry creek bed, and cattle path between here and there. It'll take twice as long, but there won't be a single checkpoint along the way." As they left the quarry behind, Emma looked back toward the Thompson place. The circle of Brahman cattle remained, their presence preventing immediate pursuit. Their coordinated behavior defied conventional understanding of cattle cognition, yet aligned perfectly with what her mother's research had documented decades ago. "They're protecting their own," she murmured, watching the extraordinary scene. Carson nodded. Intelligence recognizes intelligence. That's what your mother understood from the beginning. These animals aren't just smarter versions of regular cattle. They're something altogether different. Something that deserves to determine its own fate. The truck and trailer bounced along an overgrown trail that would eventually connect with Carson's mapped escape route. Behind them, Daisy and Titan, living embodiments of Operation Silk Road's success and its ethical complexity, swayed with the vehicle's movement, finally heading toward safety rather than exploitation. Whatever happened next, with Keating, with Helix Security, with the evidence Collins had secured, one thing was certain. The extraordinary animals Eleanor Fletcher and her colleagues had helped create decades ago would not become weapons or laboratory specimens. They would live as they were meant to live, free to develop their remarkable abilities in peace. As for Emma herself, she had found answers to questions she hadn't known to ask about her mother's past, about the intersection of science and ethics, and about the remarkable depths of intelligence that could exist in species humans too often dismissed as mere livestock. Some discoveries changed everything, and there was no going back. In our story of courage and connection, we witness the extraordinary bond between Daisy and Titan, a reminder that love transcends all boundaries, even species. Eleanor's journey mirrors what many of us experience. Though memories fade, the most important ones, those charged with love and purpose, remain anchored in our hearts. Emma's discovery that her mother was more than just a rancher, but a brilliant scientist whose work was decades ahead of its time, speaks to how we often underestimate our parents and their legacies. As we age, isn't it comforting to know that what truly matters, our love, our wisdom, our life's purpose, can survive even when other memories grow dim? That the connections we forge and the good we do in the world continue long after we may have forgotten them ourselves. This tale reminds us that it's never too late for redemption, for reunions, for discovering hidden truths about those we thought we knew completely. Has there been a moment when you discovered something surprising about a parent or loved one that changed how you saw them? Or perhaps a time when you felt that special bond with an animal that seemed to understand you on a deeper level? Share your stories in the comments below. The connections we make are what give life its deepest meaning.